Joel Coulter, he's going to be the lead moderator for what we are identifying as a VIP fireside chat on cyber and digital transformation solutions. We've looked at the threat, we've looked at the supply chain vulnerabilities, the priorities. Now we want to look at some initiatives and projects, maybe some future activities in cyberspace. And Joel, you and I, we've known each other for quite a while. While I drive, I'm gonna talk.
Okay.
I think it was the National Guard partnership program.
Yes.
When AFRICOM was considered to be put at McGuire Air Force Base back in my
went to Suffolk
reservist military days. But I mean, you've been around the world, so I definitely, start right now. I'd like to hear more.
Yeah.
Our audience would like to hear more about you, your background, and then we also have two distinguished guests who I'm going to put on our screen shortly. Dr. Reuben Egolf, he's the founder and chairman of STP Energy and Solutions. He's also the Foreign Relations Ambassador for the UN Sustainable Development Goals Intergovernmental Organization. And it's very good to see you, Ambassador Dr. Egolf. My time, I had 10 years on the UNA Association of the Board of Directors, specifically looking at peacekeeping and peace building. And as that time progressed, cyberspace and cybersecurity, especially capacity building in many countries, really became a topic of interest for the United Nations. So I'm happy to have you. And second, sir, we have retired United States Army Major General John Wharton. And we just had a conversation recently at the airport in Tampa. And we realized we may have crossed paths in the Army when you were a commanding general officer for the Research Development Engineering Command. I know it as RDECOM, so when I have to spell it out, it's a little more difficult. But now you're the chairman and the CEO of the Global Connective Center. And if I'm not mistaken, you're working a few initiatives with the presidential transition. But while I put you on the screen, Joel, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure.
To moderate our fireside chat.
Well, thank you much, Jeff. I really appreciate Eli the opportunity when he came to me months ago and said, we really need to get back to strategy and not just be online transactional. And I think the 90s with global outsourcing, and there were a lot of things that pushed us into this ignorance of the fact that China and Russia and Iran were benefiting. And one day I got a call from a friend, said that, Iran had called him to buy his iPals product. And we led the world at that time in IPv6, and China had Golden Shield. And we had told China, don't sell Golden Shield to Iran. Well, they did. And I had the emails, and we went to InfraGard, and I've been a part of a lot of, let's just say, blessed by knowing a lot of amazing people that are leaders in their field, and then touching some disruptive technologies and socializing those. And the state partner program that Jeff and it was one of those local to global channels where we work with National Guard. There's InfraGard. There's, the United States has a lot of people forward deployed, and we lead the world in logistics. We lead the world in groupware. And we lead the world, but we're not, for whatever reason, taking our leadership. And one of the goals of the Gold Institute is let's reclaim that. And I think a lot of countries are looking for us to lead. I think we have a new administration that wants to lead in new ways. So I really appreciate the fact that when I met General Wharton, he talked about a whole of nation approach, and I'd hold the whole of government and whole of society, but the whole of nation resonated with critical infrastructure. And I think we put a lot of eggs in the Silicon Valley basket, but I don't think Silicon Valley is going to protect our critical infrastructure. So again, with Tom Goldberg and the people I know, I think things are now finally getting to the point where we can't allow, as what Tom calls poison fruit, it's embedded in so much of our supply chain that we're very compromised. And so I'm glad to see that everybody on the space agrees that we need to not have global standards, because I think that takes advantage. So, and then Reuben and I popped up on my TV screen, and he just happened to be the principal of Sette Me Principe, And that's where the Navy started 2 programs I'm aware of that pre-positioned stuff around the world. And then I worked on the Air Force on some things about that. And what's interesting is Jeff building capacity partners. I think when we focus on critical infrastructure, we're going to approach that around the world much differently than China. And because they killed a friend of mine in 05, and I told Tom Goldberg I got an early start on what happens when you try to do business with China and your father happens to sell to the IC. And I did a global summit warning the world, if you follow China's internet and telecom policies, they'll take all your data. And so I'm glad to be here today. I look forward. This is the first of, I hope, a series of, because I think that we really need to create new leaders. And so I'm with the Neptune Shield now, but it is connected to other hubs that Caesar gave me opportunity. We said, when I first met him in 17, he said he wanted to replicate. Oh, well, I have a global network, so replication of what America does to other countries is not too difficult for me. But I know that China's very aggressive, one belt, one road, one digital, one currency. And if we don't get out there and start leading, China will lead. They have no problem leading. So again, I'll turn it over now to General Wharton and Reuben. And basically, I guess my first question to y'all is, you know, what are your thoughts from your perspective on cyber and digital transformation?
Well, Joe, thanks for having me, and appreciate the Gold Institute and Neptune Shield folks for letting me come and spend a little bit of time for you. And I appreciate the question, but boy, when I listened to all those great experts before me, when you take the sum of all their parts, I'm going to talk to a lot of those things. But just before I do, I led the Army R&D S&T. Important here is the C5ISR Center at Aberdeen, and RDECOM designed the base, which became now the Futures Command from that standpoint. But then the previous part was all global supply chain logistics. When you take the logistics and then the R&D and you combine that all together, it is a little bit of a different career pattern. But let me, when I always talk about things, I always talk about national security, and I start with the national security strategy. And everyone else has talked about that. And the folks that have been on before me are the big functional experts, who's the big names in the subject. I'm the guy who gets to go out in support of our government initiatives, go talk to government leaders, and I'm talking about either the president, the prime ministers, and those people on behalf of the U.S., and talk to them and bring them capability, all forms of technology, all forms, whether it's energy, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's communications, healthcare, and all those things. Okay. So, Joel, you mentioned the whole nation approach. So part of that goes back to the national security strategy, the security and prosperity U.S. And then what are the national elements of power? How do we implement that? But if I started at the top, I mean, there's policy execute disconnects from the start, right? So when we sit there, and this forum, I think, has a large focus on policy and helping shape policy. If you just walk what we used to say, the mission essential task from the national security strategy, U.S. cyber strategy, down to everyone, you see disconnects in the linkages between that strategy and the elements of power and how we implement that. So there's tremendous policy execution disconnects across the nation and into the subordinate commands. What I used to tell everyone, I look at a theater, I look at the nation, we're heavily involved in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. And it's a Rubik's Cube when it comes to cyber, when it comes to technology. You got to know your capability, your adversary's capabilities. You got to know the different domains, air, land, sea. Then you're twisting that. What's their capabilities? What's in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? And how are you playing chess to align throughout all the domains? Cyber is a domain that we do, right? So you've heard that from everything. So I'm always looking at that. I'm looking at the enterprise level, the national strategic level, then the operational level, then the tactical level. And how are we fixing every level across the board there? So the levels of war are very important as we look at it, as we think about cyber and solutions at the enterprise level down to OT items, as you heard Daryl, and all that. So all that's pretty pretty common. But what I also tell everyone is everyone gets thinking about cyber, and our strategy, if you look at, again, national security, tends to be a reactive strategy, not a proactive strategy. And if you look at the US cyber strategy, it's all react, respond. Okay, there's a little bit of threat detection in there, but it's a reactive. And I was up at New Steel in New York, the DHS activity. They said they only respond to right of boom, not to the left of boom. So it's kind of why, what are we doing to the left of boom? But don't forget the network. And everyone, we get cyber, and in the early days when cyber became big, like AI and like quantum, I used to argue, what about the network? Because if I control the network, I can control cyber, whether it's wired, wireless, or whatever. And so how am I affecting the network? Now that's obvious, but we tend to think of cyber and we tend to network. Now the network also gives us the effect to gain intelligence, to know where there's vulnerabilities, to get our friendly adversary and to protect our critical infrastructure as we talk. So these are some of the things we talked about. Let me just go a couple more and I'll turn over to Reuben here real quick. Public-private partnerships are key. The government cannot do it alone. Industry has to help. Now, that doesn't mean industry gets the handout. The government, I used to run the 1,500 creatives with the academics and the 1,000 with industry. Can't keep having a handout. You have to have a sustaining business model on developing of new technologies in the future. So the importance here with CIST, CISA, and NIST are very important for standards. Let me give another policy thing that I just would throw out to you. What constitutes an act of war? Military, tactical, different levels. Here's the rules of engagement, when you can engage, when you can't engage. What are the rules of war for cyber? What constitutes an act that is a rule of war that protects a vital interest? Now, vital interest in the old days is what we used to go to, what we would fight for. And that's how we define vital interest from national strategy. What constitutes an act of war, or what are our rules of engagement? And we're seeing a couple of the diplomatic rules of engagement, but when does it become more? And when do you move from diplomatic and tariffs and, sanctions and things of that nature? And then when does it become more important if you can take out the infrastructure of military base as we're trying to protect in the Pacific and things of that nature? We talked defense industrial base. I'm going to stop there. Let me just turn over to Reuben for Reuben to speak. And Reuben, good to see you. And those are just some initial thoughts just based on time and all the great leaders that have already spoken here. Reuben, please.
Thank you, General. Thank you, and good to see you as well. And want to first of all thank Gold Institute and Neptune Shield. Thank you for this invite, and it's always good to see my good friend Joe from afar, I guess, at this moment. And so it's a privilege to be here. Quickly, I'll just jump right in, just give you what we do and then what we see. And then I have a question that I'd like to throw out here as well. And General Wharton kind of alluded to this, and that's dealing with the PPP. We deal with governments around the world, interact with them continuously in developing their infrastructures. Currently in whether it's healthcare, right now we're in developing in 2 nations, helping them, guide them, more than just consulting, but actually boots on the ground, actually doing the work on the ground with land concessions going forward, actually building the structures and so on and so forth. Beyond that, energy, you name it, we work directly with the governments to do that in their respective ministries. Quickly cover all of that ground. It's immaterial. The point I want to get to is I am obviously not a government official. I'm not in the government. I hit the corruption on a daily basis. I hit the situations in these foreign governments constantly. You see the players and the actors of Russia and China constantly in these palaces of power. They don't hide it. They're very blatant. brazen. They don't seem very secretive in what they're doing. This leads me to a quick question here is, why doesn't the U.S. government work more in conjunction with civilian business as a PPP, even when it comes to the intelligence, eyes on the ground, from conversations, all of those kinds of things? I'm going to give you an example that why this question comes up. I've seen things firsthand, have colleagues, eyewitnesses of things that would threaten our national security. We are civilian, we're citizens. We are not in government capacity in that regard. We're not in the intelligence community, okay? When someone like myself reports things that are legitimate, photographed, whatever the case, it is a threat to our national security and it's infringing on our foreign policy. Here's the responses that I've gotten over the years. Instead of welcoming the information that's been validated, not a pipe dream, not something made up or conspiracy theory, it's actual evidence. Instead of welcoming it, I've gotten shouted at on how I know these things. And there's this idea that if a particular agency or government entity doesn't know it, they're mad at you because you know it, and then it's a deaf ear. It's gone. We have had to resort to intercepting China and Russia aggression by working overtime in privatizing situations such as uranium mines, all kinds of things. Right now, I'm in the process. Right now, we are purchasing uranium mine to keep it out of the hands of China. The United States government told me basically don't care. I know this is getting off with the cyber, but this whole thing to me it's astounding to me, the the lackadaisical attitude at times in the official capacities, to where evidence is ignored when there's these real live threats. Things can be deterred in a much quicker real time, but there's no seemingly there's no care about it. That's the attitude I get. That's my opinion, but that's what I see. So my question there is should there be more of a interaction? Should there be more of a trust developed between? That's just a thought of mine. Hopefully I'm not coming across that I have an axe to grind, but sometimes when you're on the front line in business, in international affairs, it becomes very frustrating when you see what you perceive as easy fixes to some things. And it's totally, I don't know, it's aloof. There you go.
Let me just comment a little bit, Reuben, because we talked about a whole of nation approach, but some of the previous panelists even talked about it, who's in charge. And now what you do is this has been a problem in early days within the government, is there's functional leads and then there's operational leads, right? So say you're in Africa, who's in charge? Is it AFRICOM? Is it a military operation? Is it a private sector event? Is it a cyber functional where there may be another entity or agency that's responsible? So sometimes the technical versus functional, but even at a higher level, let's just take the drone incident in New Jersey, right? Who controlled the drones? And you saw the bouncing around. Who's in charge? Was the Department of Defense? Was it DHS? Was the FAA? There's the same fragmentation that exists in cyber of signing and bringing everything together. Now, I don't want to paint the picture. There are actions trying to get after that, trying to assert authority, responsibility, and accountability. I think NSA is doing it, trying to do it with their Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, where it's an open public-private partnership where everyone can come in and collaborate. But we're behind. We're behind, and we got to move out. Let me stop there.
Yeah, come on.
Thank you.
My comment is there that I think we built this whole world around IT, and you have a delay in your email or delay in your conversation. you don't think anything of it. In the operational intel world, that's a whole different game. And I just don't think strategically we're there yet to deal with those people like International Stability Operations Association, the people who build critical infrastructures around the world, bump into things that are valuable strategically to national security, but there is no official, we have to create it because I don't think it exists. And so I think there's a lot of, it's coming out now that even with electronic warfare and cognitive warfare, that there have been attacks, neuro attacks, and we have an international standards body, but all the American companies left because at the last global summit, China dominated and was allowed to. So we've got to realize that America can lead, and it should not be afraid to lead, and it should set up the strategic think, with the think tanks. And I'll get back to the hubs because I want to ask you all a question. One of the reasons why I think we're so slow to react is that we really don't have the catalyst and accelerators when we have small businesses with really great innovations. So the question I have to Reuben, you and others is, how can the Neptune Shield Tech Hub, where we have pre-positioned things at ports all over the world, and we have a maritime, and 9% of the world's commerce is over the water, 70% of the people live near the water, and the African nations have asked us to get more involved in, critical infrastructure, and they're farm to table, they do everything over rivers. And so the question I have is, how can, going forward with the new administration, how can this Innovation Hub Alliance, state partner program, and those kind of channels that America has better than anybody, how can we start leveraging that as a better joint operation?
You want me to take a shot at that?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, the comment that you make is very much spot on, Joel, from that standpoint of how do we do that? Now, look how we have evolved over time. I was with Secretary Carter when Cut the Ribbon at that time, DIU-X. I've been involved with Ensign, and as Ensign's moved under DIU, and look how many accelerators are out there. I suspect this administration, first of all, is going to go back and look at where we spent money and what have we made a program of record and what have we brought that's been a capability to the government. Now that's point one. Now, so therefore, what's the value proposition of what you do? And it's operationalizing the technology. And what I want to have is this group that I'm looking at, like I've told you many a time, is look, I'm dealing with a country. We're in Colombia right now trying to buy 2 ports and put in a 5G network with the government. I got guys there right now as we speak. I'm missing because they are talking to, we've talked to the president, the vice president, minister, and they're finalizing that. I don't have the capability. I want to reach back to folks like you at Neptune Shield and the experts that I'm looking at in this chart and say, I need this capability to bring to this theater. What is the best of all breeds? So it's operationalizing for Neptune Shield, operationalizing the need. I don't want to own it. I'm shaking the hand of the president. We're bringing him 5G. We're trying to acquire some ports, and I need to come back to get the best of all breeds for seaports, for airports, for communications architecture. I need to rip out the old hardware, bring in the software, which we get that contract, but I need the capability that I reach back into the right organization. So I would say to you, as you think about the way ahead, is there's many accelerators in many different areas, SouthX, AppWorks, everything. The difference is operationalizing capability where there's a business model, where there is a contract to bring the best of all breeds forward. And that's why I need folks like you to help me do that. Okay?
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else questions, response from the group that are remote?
I mean, I will jump in on this after thinking briefly. You mentioned the policy, and I'm looking at it in the opposite perspective, not from the U.S. perspective. When I was doing cyber advising in Eastern Europe, Romania would be a prime example of one of the countries we worked with. And we talked about red lines earlier. We talked about sanctions. Are they effective? we've talked about maybe there's a more aggressive need for response, especially if something is more disruptive than what it has been in the past. In the case of Romania, they couldn't define who's in charge in a peacetime or wartime environment. And they didn't have policy, they didn't have continuity of government, or COOP, as many of us know the acronym. So I would have a question for both of you from your different perspectives. More on the diplomatic side versus the flag officer military side. How it only seems that the threat and the trends are going to continue to escalate. Deterrence is a word on paper, literally in an NIE that hasn't done anything since it's been written. And there's been red line memos that have been good for conversation points. Earlier, we talked about kinetic non-lethal options if an actual cyber compromise or activity was to that severe degree, say like you see between Iran and Israel. What are your thoughts, gentlemen, on red lines and initiatives perhaps that need to be implemented in this new administration?
Reuben, do you want to take it first?
Well, I think just the first shot, speaking from a business standpoint and also diplomatically and working with them, this may seem like a just kind of a elementary response to this, but what I've seen with a lot of these governments and in private conversations, a simple nod of reassurance from the U.S. goes a long way. Anytime they start to feel like they are being vacated or there's an ignoring or whatever the case, China and Russia just they ramp it up. They expose that weakness. The countries at times, their leadership, they get fearful. I've at times have pled with the U.S. government at times. Just give a nod. Just bring a reassurance. That's all this prime minister. That's all this president is looking for. He's feeling like you're leaving him estranged. And when that doesn't happen, they become paranoid, you might say. And then there's others who are too quick to fill the void. It's kind of like blood in the water. The sharks begin to circle. America needs to, they're going to draw a red line, then enforce it. Say what you mean and mean what you say. And provide, what is necessary here. Because the advancing American interest is a big part of advancing American interest is the business side of it. It's American business that's having it's more than just doing business in the country. You're promoting the American way or the American standard or its supposed moral ground in ethics. You're doing you're the extended arm of the U.S. When you're in that country. There's a lot of work to be done, but I see that as, I know it's an elementary response, but I tell you, at times I think there ought to be a more proactive engagement in a lot of these and pay attention to it.
So
Colonel Wharton, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, the reason why I started with the national security strategy because preserve our way of life, right? And that includes economic freedom and prosperity and all that. So when you start at that, and then where do you draw the line? And if I take down your financial system, if I take down Wall Street and I stop world economy by choke points in South Pacific or Panama or wherever, what constitutes an act of war, or the Houthis rebels, right? So, and what's the difference between a civilian installation and a military installation, right? If I take out a military, is that an act of war? Is that allowable? If I'm in Syria. But if I'm in the US and you want to take out a military installation with a cyber threat, you may say, okay, that's military. Hey, we're at tension with this country. So you have to define the rules. You have to define the rules of engagement. Where are the red lines? When do we engage? Here's our first step diplomatically in the elements of power: diplomatic, information, military, economic. and you start working the diplomatic, you work a little bit in the economic, you go to a point where, hey, this is unacceptable. And this is unacceptable. What was unacceptable was the Red Sea, right? We finally put forces in there and to counter the Houthis, right? Kinetically, right? And things of that nature. So you have to define it of what's going to have you, what's a vital interest that you're willing to fight for and preserve and protect. And how do you communicate that? If you do this, we're going to do this kind of thing. So what are the rules of law for cyber? And it goes back to the discussions you've had with these great experts. Who's defining the rules of law? And it's like an NDA, right? It keeps honest people honest, right? Maybe. Well, you can have the rules here, but who follows those rules? Let me give one other point. That is, you're talking about foreign nations. I always found out when I was out in commanding and things like that. Every nation would come up to me, hey, General Wharton, we need more interoperability. Have our combatant commanders come up. We need more interoperability. So I finally said to him at a major general forum, International Pacific, I said, okay, define interoperability. What do you define as interoperability? Right? So if you're talking about your systems, your stamuses, to be able to talk to each other, and maybe I can give the Five Eyes this, but I can't give everyone else this, or even the Five Eyes more than this. What does operability mean? We just fought Iraq and Afghanistan side by side, same command and control systems that we're able to coordinate. So what is the definition of interoperability? What's the definition of interoperability amongst nations for cyber? And again, I'm just trying to stimulate thought. I'm not saying that, but okay, I agree with what Reuben said. If we're there, US, that's a comfort feeling. Can we protect everything? The answer is no. Therefore, what's the line in the sand that we will do something if you do this? Do we know what the 17 or 16 critical infrastructure points are in the US? I'd venture to say that other than this group here, very few know what how we define critical infrastructure from the Department of Homeland Security that we say we're going to protect. And if we take down our economic system, and the new coming asset-based economy, countering BRICS, and we're fighting, at that global level, what's an act of war? So anyways, what are rules of engagement? I'm just giving you thoughts.
Well, this actually, I think we're starting a topic for a follow-on workshop.
Yes, we are.
So thank you, General. But I'm reminded of the SAM compromises and activities in Georgia. If I'm the governor of Georgia or the mayor of the city of Atlanta, I'm going to have a different perspective and concern, I think, from the federal level. And I especially if I'm, retired military, knew what a military environment was, what a preparation of the battlefield was. I definitely would view an attack on my emergency response system, including 911, where people are resorted to start writing down messages in a notepad with a pencil. And that is what happened in the city of Atlanta, as one example. So I think we really start to bring up new topics. What I would like to do, if you still have questions, please raise your hand. And then Joel, I know you have a follow-on, or provide your question in a chat.
Okay. So Nick Anderson and Tom Goldberg, and I think that, in honor of President Carter, he was a submariner. With that, because what happened in the Navy subs, we created the whole industry called root cause failure analysis, failure modes effect analysis, which every oil, gas, chemical, nuclear company in the world has to go through training that came out of the United States. And, I've met with the Swiss and Santec and all these prognosticative left of bang capabilities. But what's interesting is they want to centralize it. And I'm like, no, you can't stamp a cyber or drone electronic warfare attack. If I'm trying to collect all this data around the world, send it back to the Pentagon or NGA and make it data at rest, because Microsoft just said, we believe once we store the data, it's at rest, it's easily hackable or manipulable. Right. So I was blessed to work with John Marshall on Data on the Move with Lucian Niemeyer And the goal is, can we move the data before we store the data? Because the data needs to be in a dashboard somewhere, identifying that something's off of normal and it needs to be removed before it fails. Now, down at Reliability Center, it gets into mining, ports, oil, gas, chemical, nuclear. So it continues to expand this early warning system. And I think, can we prioritize like energy and logistics? There's certain critical infrastructure. You have no power, you're done. You have no logistics, you're done. So I think we can focus those areas where we already have a huge group of people around the world coming to our training here in the United States, because helped build it a long time ago. And so what do you think about that? What do you think about leveraging the Common Alert Protocol? We have international standards that come from America. Do you think we can piggyback on those?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, absolutely. But I think you always also, the thing that I enjoyed is here you have, for lack of better words, current operations, what you need to do right now. And again, the leaders that have already spoken have talked a lot about fixing current existing problems. You know, if we were on a time horizon, we're 10 to 15 years behind probably where we need to be. Because right over the horizon, what we're seeing these attacks, but over the horizon in a time hack here is you're looking at now AI driven threat intelligence and cyber, right? You're looking at what does quantum do? And we haven't solved the problems over here on the left, right? So what is my zero trust architecture, you know, for the future, and secure edge computing and secure edge data management and things of that nature. So edge of grid solutions that I don't have to send everything back and have it centralized. So the question, Joel, I'm not answering directly. I'm just giving you some thoughts on how, you know, we have to solve the current ops. There's a future ops, and then there's a deep futures that we got to constantly chain that Rubik cube to know how we're evolving and what we have to do to solve it, and how do we train. And, you know, and it starts with STEM, workforce development, like some of the folks have said, to grow the next generation of scientists, engineers in this field. Do you outsource to the private sector? All that comes in play, right? In the air, you know, look at Transcom. If we go to major war, they have agreements standing up with Merid to use ships. Same thing with the aircraft. They got the major aircraft to fly over for response. What do you do in cyber? Is there something, and I'm making this up, but I'm just saying we need to think more actively and work more proactively.
So,
Yeah, Robert.
yeah, I want to address the sort of bookends that the general have thrown out here of active war versus rules of engagement. And I'm actually going to hold off and not say a lot on the active war. I think that's a very interesting subject, which I'm not really prepared to say all my thoughts on before I came here on. But let me go to the other side of that bookend, to rules of engagement, right? Every so often, unfortunately, in this country, we'll have someone, usually they're inebriated or something like that. They don't stop when they're trying to go into a military base. We've had this happen at Fort Meade a couple times, right? People don't stop. They're coming out to the base at Quantico or Fort Meade or someplace like that. And there are Marines at the gate or security at the gate who have rules of engagement that let them employ lethal force. Sometimes people get killed, sometimes they don't. That's not an active war, not active war declaration question. It's a rule of engagement. So whereas Congress declares war, rules of engagement that involve sometimes lethal force can be delegated down to your NCOs at the gate. So when we think about cyberspace, right, and it doesn't always have to even be military or even police. There are
Right.
rules of engagement for people's own house that depending on your state, that can allow lethal use of force by civilians. So I think when we think about this in cyberspace, as we try to put our conceptions, our ConOps into cyberspace, there may be some utility to be had by thinking about, especially when you have a piece of critical infrastructure,
Right.
as we've defined it, which is maintained and operated by either civilians or government. Are there rules of engagement to put some teeth in the deterrence or the response that don't require things to be adjudicated in an active war question.
Yeah, and it's a graduated response, Mr. Gold, I agree. And, you start over here on the far left, but I think it starts with defining, what your critical infrastructure is, which DHS has defined the 16 or 17 areas they say, right? And the interdependencies amongst those areas, which they have done. Now, each one of them has a different set. I'm using rules of engagement, just as an example. Each one of them has a different significance of the government, right? If you take out a national lab or a nuclear site that's providing power and generation, there's different rules, right? Or taking out a hospital or a port or an airfield. So I'm just trying to stimulate the thought of here's your critical infrastructure. What are those rules? What are the tools that you would act on a graduated plane, to an ultimate, making it kinetic, depending on the critical infrastructure, what they did, and what you're willing to do, right? That's all. I'm just trying to stimulate that thought with this group because these are the big thinkers here, the people around this room. Okay.
So yeah, I'm trying to take it down to a cyber on cyber delegated level, saying if you're in a certain category and a certain type of event is happening, what are you allowed to do in response without that policy adjudication? I'm not offering what that should be. I'm just saying, when you said rules of engagement, I thought of the guard gates up the road where they might find out a week later what country and the people came from and what their intent was. But if you try to ram the Quantico gate, they don't require an attribution of where you're coming from to have certain responses. So what's the cyber equivalent?
Well, a piggyback, rules of engagement allow left to bang, because most of the time now, because we have so many lawyers go in the boardroom and they make all the decisions. And then where we have, I need a port. I'm a Navy, Coast Guard, but the port is run by commercial. So if I go a rules of engagement approach, I don't want the lawyers to get in the mix of that. So that's what Sea Machines did recently when they transferred all their commercial Navy stuff commercial to Navy. And now we're experimenting with, early warning. It goes right back to the Navy and Coast Guard because the commercial guys are giving us the early warning. So I think a rules of engagement approach with a dash would help the United States because the other countries don't have lawyers telling them what to do.
I just throw it out for the group. I'll attribute the general for bringing the term into the mix.
Yeah. So what do you think about that?
No, this is a great group of great thinkers, and I'm just trying to stimulate thought for appropriate responses in a graduated way when someone does something, right? And because you're going to get to that point, right? If China were to take down a financial market and change our economy, they're affecting our way of life, our way of living, and in that. So what appropriate response is that? Right. And then again, each type of infrastructure may have a different significance from a scale. So I think that you can work with that as just as a thought piece to think about the way ahead. But anyways, just for thoughts.
There's so many factors that go into that, attribution being number one. Is it attributed state-sponsored actor or malware,
right,
or non-state sponsored? Then it gets hybrid and muddy. Is it state-sponsored cybercrime, which the McCrary Institute brought up earlier today as a recommendation for more focus? But again, it comes down to perhaps some elevation and integration into some of these thoughts in the new strategy and implementation. And that's just an enhancement. It's not necessarily a change, because you've seen some changes from the initial, and that's how the intent of this summit began, looking at the initial strategy from 2018 under the Trump administration and the evolution of that, including the implementation plan and other strategies, to include AI that was put out by CISA. And we're now awaiting another pending executive order, as I mentioned in the beginning, that could give an organization like CISA more authorities. I know of colleagues, I won't say where they necessarily come from, but I think interagency is a big key word, and the removal of the stovepipes. They still exist, especially when you look at that program of record.
Yeah.
You look at that palm drill on the military side, the services versus the combatant commands. On the intelligence community side, they've got their own lines, plus defense and the civilian in the multiple authorities. And that's why we need tabletop exercise. And that's why I brought up Romania. We're really no different. And so if we want to give them the reassurance, Dr. Egolf, we have to know what our policy is, what are our rules of engagement. That way we can share them with the country in Romania and do a tabletop exercise with them and run through this drill. If their port security gets impacted where they can't conduct any types of shipping, say with their electrical grid, what are the next steps? Incident response immediately. What are the next steps for a SAMSAM in the city of Atlanta? We question that actually. Who's doing what? FBI? Who's responsible? And we really need to start asking those tough questions and putting together some of that policy and standardization.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, I think this has been a great initial virtual session. And I know we'll go back with the Quantico Cyber, Neptune, and Maryland to start figuring out ways we can move this forward that guides new leadership because of the whole battlefield and the cyber world and the whole black market, criminal power structures. The world has changed very rapidly, and we need to start creating new early warning, left of bank capabilities and rules of engagement so that we're not hindered and have a hand behind our back. And we can, in a non-kinetic world, it shouldn't be that bad if we're just doing non-kinetic things. But so I'm looking forward to future sessions. I really appreciate all my friends and Jeff's friends and the Gold Institute and the other countries that participated, and more to come.
Yeah, we definitely welcome you all back. The Gold Institute is very proud to host our first Cyber Summit. We are looking, as I'd mentioned, a quarterly workshop series. Some of the topics we're looking at that left the boom. That includes maybe cyber counterintelligence, cybersecurity defense, incident response, resilience, deterrence. Second topic, we're looking at cyber and digital transformation for America's economy. Is AI too regulated? And if China's ahead of the game in terms of technology and use of artificial intelligence, especially when there's no divide between the civilian and the government and the military side, are we behind? Looking at cyber workforce, Secretary LaRose gave a perfect example of the models of what he's doing in the state of Ohio. So looking at education, training, and skill sets with an emphasis on choice in cyber leadership and strategic partnerships. Michelle, I think you actually laid the baseline for that workshop, the G0, perhaps a G1 after January 21st. So again, thank you all participants, and especially our VIPs and distinguished participants in our audience, our members of the Gold Institute. And I have put the entire presentation into the chat group, so you should have access to that. And then I'll also put my email in the chat group. And feel free to reach out to me, questions, information. I'm hoping that we'll have a future event over the next couple of months. And if you have ideas for a workshop, we also look to host a monthly, event as well. For instance, Microsoft puts out their new cyber threat report. We would hope to get a representative from Microsoft. That would be a shorter program. But we do hope to put longer programs like a workshop together on those topics that I just highlighted. So again, thank you everyone, and enjoy your evening.
Yep.
And Joel, thank you.
Thank you for having me here.
Robert.
Great.
It's great
Thank
to
you
be.
all.
It feels like a reunion right here. And there's one more
That's a
thank
mini
you,
Nick
and that's
reunion,
Caesar
yeah.
Nader. He's the president and CEO of XCore Solutions, where we are right now. One part of that whole environment is the Quantico Cyber Hub. We also have the American Cyber League.
Right. We have the Mid-Atlantic Tech Bridge Table X 18 chapters. There's so much we have that we just need to pull together.
Yeah.
With the kind of front-end work that Reuben does and his partners on critical infrastructure, we should be more engaged.
And in your packet, you'll also have more background on the Quantico Cyber Hub as well. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.